The first time I saw the extra door, I thought the builders had made a mistake. The second time, I knew it wasn't a mistake, because I'd already nailed that door shut. I was working alone at an abandoned farmhouse in northern Maine, preparing it for demolition. Every night, I locked every entrance before leaving. Every morning, something inside the house had changed. A chair would move. A photograph would appear where there had been an empty wall. And then, on my fourth morning, I found a small wooden door at the end of the hallway. Behind it was a child's bedroom. There was a bed, a wooden horse, a dusty red sweater, and a family photograph sitting on the pillow. I picked it up. There were 4 people in the picture: a mother, a father, a little girl, and a teenage boy standing behind them. The boy was me. The photograph was dated 1989. I wasn't even born until 1994. My name is Jack Miller. I was 32 when I took the demolition job at Blackwood Farm. The property had been abandoned for almost 20 years. It sat at the end of a dirt road surrounded by thick woods, about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The owner wanted the house demolished before winter. My job was to inspect the structure, remove anything valuable, and prepare the property for the demolition crew. Simple work, at least that's what I thought. The first day, I noticed something strange about the house. There were family photographs everywhere, on the staircase, in the living room, along the hallway. But every photograph had the faces scratched out, not damaged by age. Someone had deliberately scratched the faces away. I asked the owner about it. He simply said, "Don't worry about the pictures." That should have been my first warning. The second warning came that night. I had stayed late to finish checking the basement. At around 9 p.m., I locked the front door and walked toward my truck. Then I heard something hit the upstairs floor, a heavy sound, like furniture falling. I went back inside. I checked every room. Nothing. But when I reached the upstairs hallway, I noticed something that hadn't been there earlier. A child's red sweater was lying on the floor. I picked it up. It was covered in dust. The strange part was that the dust on the sweater was undisturbed, except for one thing. There were fresh footprints leading away from it. Small footprints. Bare feet. They went down the hallway and stopped at a wall. There was nowhere to go. I left. The next morning, the footprints were gone. So was the sweater. I told myself it was an animal. Then I noticed the hallway. It was different. The wall at the end had a door. A small wooden door I'd never seen before. I measured the wall. The room behind it shouldn't have existed. I opened it. Inside was a child's bedroom. Everything looked untouched. A small bed, a wooden horse, a bookshelf, a little desk, and on the pillow, a photograph. I picked it up. My hand started shaking. The photograph showed a family standing outside Blackwood Farm. A mother, a father, a little girl, and a teenage boy. That boy was me. I looked at the date, August 1989. I was born in 1994. I dropped the photograph. When I looked back at the room, the bed was no longer empty. A little girl was sitting on it. She had her back toward me. I couldn't see her face. I stepped backward. She slowly turned her head. And I saw that someone had scratched her face away, just like the photographs downstairs. I slammed the door. I didn't open it again that day. Instead, I drove into town and found the local library. I searched old newspapers for anything connected to Blackwood Farm. After 2 hours, I found an article. Local family disappears without a trace. The family name was Miller, my last name. The article was dated 1989. I read every word. Thomas Miller, his wife, Claire, their daughter, Emma, and their teenage son, Jonathan. The family had disappeared one night. No bodies were found. No evidence of a crime. The house had been abandoned afterward. I stared at the photograph again. The teenage boy looked exactly like me. Not similar. Exactly. Same eyes, same nose, same scar above my left eyebrow. I had gotten that scar when I was 9 years old. At least, that's what my mother always told me. I called my mother. I asked her where I was born. She said, "Boston." I asked her if she had ever heard of Blackwood Farm. There was silence. Then she said, "Jack, leave that place." I asked why. She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that I still remember. "Your father promised we'd never talk about it." My father had been dead for 7 years. I asked, "What happened there?" She hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. Not walking, running. Small feet. Back and forth. Again. 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 I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs. The hallway was empty, but the small wooden door was open. Inside the bedroom, something had changed. The wooden horse was moving, slowly rocking back and forth. There was no wind. I walked closer. Under the horse was another photograph. This one showed the same family. But there was something different. The father was holding the little girl. The mother was standing beside him. The teenage boy was missing. And behind them, there was a fifth person, a woman I'd never seen before. She was standing in the upstairs window. I looked at the photograph, then at the window. The woman was standing there, inside the actual house. I turned my flashlight toward her. She disappeared. I ran downstairs. And that's when I noticed something on the living room wall. One of the scratched-out photographs had changed. The faces were no longer scratched. I could see them. The family, the mother, the father, the little girl, and the teenage boy. Me. I pulled the photograph from the wall. Written on the back were 6 words. He came back after we buried him. I didn't understand, until I remembered something from my childhood. My mother had always told me I was an only child. But when I was little, I had a recurring nightmare. A little girl would stand outside my bedroom door. She would ask me, "Why did you leave me?" I thought it was just a childhood dream, until that night. Because when I went back upstairs, the little girl was waiting. She stood at the end of the hallway. Her face was still scratched away. She pointed toward the wall. Then she disappeared. I walked to the wall. There was another door. I opened it. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading underground. I followed it down. At the bottom was a concrete room. There were children's drawings covering the walls, houses, trees, a family. And in every drawing, there were 4 people, except the final drawing. It showed 5. The 5th person had no face. Underneath it, written in a child's handwriting, "Mom says he isn't Jack anymore." My flashlight flickered. Then I saw the old wooden box in the corner. Inside were documents, birth certificates, medical records, photographs, and 1 hospital bracelet. I picked it up. The name on it was Jonathan Miller, born August 17th, 1976. I couldn't breathe. Jonathan Miller had disappeared from Blackwood Farm in 1989. But the medical records showed something else. Jonathan had suffered severe injuries in an accident at the farm. The hospital record said he had died 2 days later. But his death certificate had never been filed. I found another document, an adoption record. A baby boy had been adopted in 1994. His original name, Jack Miller. My name. But the adoptive parents weren't the people who raised me. They were strangers. I started shaking. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. The little girl was standing at the staircase. This time, I could see her face. She looked about 8 years old, and she looked exactly like the girl in the photographs. "Emma." She pointed toward another door. I opened it. Inside was a small room. There was an old wooden chair, and beside it, a box of ashes. A label was attached. Jonathan Miller. I finally understood. Jonathan was my biological father. Emma was my biological sister. The family hadn't disappeared. They had been hiding something. Jonathan had died in the accident. Emma had survived. But their mother couldn't accept losing her son. So she began telling everyone that Jonathan was still alive. She created photographs, documents, stories, and eventually, she convinced herself that another child could replace him. Me. I wasn't born in 1994 by coincidence. I had been adopted 5 years after Jonathan's death. My biological mother had died shortly after. Emma had been the only surviving member of the family. But there was one final document, a handwritten note. It said, "If Jack ever returns, don't let Emma see him." I froze, because Emma was standing behind me. She looked at me, then smiled. And suddenly, I understood why every photograph had been scratched, why the house kept changing, why the doors appeared. Emma hadn't been haunting the house. She had been living there. She had survived all these years beneath it. I heard the basement door slam upstairs. Then another sound, a child's footsteps, running toward us. Emma grabbed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. She whispered, "He came back." I looked toward the staircase. A tall figure appeared at the top. A man, wearing an old hospital shirt. His face was burned, but I recognized him from the photographs. Jonathan, my biological father. He stared at me, then looked at Emma, and whispered, "You were never supposed to bring him home." Emma started screaming. The lights went out. I ran. I don't remember how I got outside. I only remember waking up beside my truck at sunrise. The demolition crew arrived 2 hours later. I told them not to enter the house. They laughed. Then they went inside. 20 minutes later, they came running back out. The house was empty. No basement, no secret room, no extra bedroom, nothing. The owner arrived that afternoon. I asked him one question. Who lived here after 1989? He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Nobody." I showed him the photograph. His face went completely white. He whispered, "That's impossible." I asked why. He pointed at the teenage boy, at me. Then he said, "Because that photograph was taken the morning after Jonathan died." I looked down at the photograph, and for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Everyone was looking at the camera, except Jonathan. He was looking directly at me. And behind him, scratched into the wooden wall of the farmhouse, were 3 words. "You came home." The house was demolished 3 days later. Nothing was found beneath it. No bodies. No rooms. No photographs. But I kept one thing. The original family photograph. I keep it locked in a box. 'Cause every few months, something changes. The first time, Emma disappeared from the picture. The second time, Jonathan disappeared. And last week, I looked at it again. There were only 3 people standing outside the farmhouse. My mother, my father, and me. But behind us, in the upstairs window, there was a little girl. And this time, her face wasn't scratched out. She was smiling. And underneath the photograph, in handwriting I recognized from my childhood nightmares, were 4 words. "Now you remember me."